All right, I understand we're ready to proceed, so Mr. Sullivan?
I think,
we're on Mr. Dunn.
we're on cross-examination of this witness by Mr. Dunn.
Okay.
Good morning, Mr. Judd. Do you know what a type 1 sampling error is?
No, I do not.
Is it safe to say then that when you took your sample of the radio logs, you did not account for type 1 sampling errors?
I would not know what it is, so I would not be able to answer that.
Do you know what a type 2 sampling error is? And therefore, would it also be safe to say that you didn't?
I would not be able to answer that.
Do you know what a biased estimator is?
No.
So would it be safe to say that when you took your sample, you did not account for potential biases?
I just took a random sampling. I didn't take anything into account.
Do you know what statistical significance is?
I heard what it is, heard about it, but like I said, I didn't take that into account.
Could you speak a little louder, please, for me?
Sure.
I'm getting old.
Did you do any statistical significance tests on your estimator?
No.
Do you know what an F critical test is?
No.
Would it be safe to say, therefore, that you did not do an F critical test? Do you know what a T critical test is?
No.
Would it be safe to say then that you didn't do a T critical test?
I didn't.
Do you know what a chi-squared critical test is?
No, not officially, no.
Would it be safe to say that you did not do a chi-squared critical test of your estimator?
I would not be able to answer that. If I don't know the definition of what it is, I can't tell you yes or no.
I believe you testified that in Salt Lake, the contract, the standard of care contract for Salt Lake sets a time for lights and sirens calls of 9 minutes and 59 seconds. Is that correct?
Yes.
Is it therefore your understanding that if Gold Cross responds within 9 minutes and 59 seconds, that they've complied with the standard of care in Salt Lake?
We've complied with our contract, but we also hold ourselves to the 8:59 in Salt Lake City.
Or you've complied to the contract?
Correct.
Nothing further for this witness at this time.
Okay, just a few questions. Mr. Judd, do you know if St. George Dispatch records the time at which a Dixie Ambulance unit is paged?
Yes, they do.
And do you have an understanding as to why St. George Dispatch did not provide the time at which Dixie Ambulance is paged for each and every call in the universe of dispatch data that you looked at?
I know that we requested that in our initial document discovery. They said they were unable to provide that data element on the way they could pull it out. The only way they can pull that out is to look at each and every individual incident that Dixie Ambulance responded on, and that is very time consuming and everything, so that's why.
Is that why you gave them just a list to pull?
Correct.
And Mr. Dunn asked you some questions about the Polaris data for Dixie Ambulance.
Yeah.
And you are familiar with the Polaris data?
Yeah.
And does the Polaris data include a field for unit notified by dispatch?
Yes.
So it shows the date and time purportedly that a unit is notified by dispatch, is that right? And Exhibit 50, it's not going to be in your binders because it's raw response time data from Polaris. So you have it electronically, but I also have an excerpt that might just be easier to look at. It's already been admitted, 58.
Exhibit 58?
Yeah.
Which is massive.
It's massive. It's very hard to
Thousands
print.
of pages.
Thousands and thousands
You
of
mean
pages.
it's even more?
No, it's not in
Yeah,
much.
it is.
I don't know how many binders it would take. So I only have 2 copies, unfortunately, but do you know, Mr. Judd, if that's an excerpt of the Polaris data for Dixie Ambulance? Well, I'll represent to you that it is, but does that look familiar?
Yes.
And do you see the headings up at the top that have sort of numbers and letters, E05_04?
Correct. Yes.
Do you know what in particular, do you know what E05_04 and E05_05 mean?
They sent, I got from Joshua Blakler from the state with just table that gives you the title to each one of these numbers, those things at the top. And there was the time the call was received, the time the call was dispatched, the time the unit went en route, and the time the unit arrived on scene, the tracking of all the times throughout. To say which one is each of these, I don't know for sure without looking at the...
Well, I'll just represent to you that this is, it's just set forth in the Utah Administrative Code, and E05_04 is unit notified by dispatch date/time, and E05_05 is unit en route date/time.
Okay.
And looking at those, what do you see about those two columns?
Well, looking at it, a good majority of them are identical, the time that the unit was notified and the time the unit went en route. And the biggest thing is there's no seconds, it's just hour and minutes. So you can't really go down to the exact seconds on it.
And so Mr. Dunn asked you a series of questions about why you didn't use the Polaris data to determine when Dixie Ambulance was paged. Can you explain why?
Because it's like even minutes, and a lot of them are the same as en route. And I'll be honest, unless you have the seconds, it's pretty much impossible to have the dispatched and en route time exactly the same. There's going to be a second or two, a minimum difference between those.
And can you just, for the non-ambulance people in the room, explain why, as a practical matter?
Just as a practical matter, from the time the unit's paged till a unit goes en route and they acknowledge, it takes a few minutes to get into the ambulance or to at least acknowledge it over the radio and be en route.
So what does that suggest to you about this data?
That really it's not even, I don't know how you could do an analysis off of it and really do an 8-minute or a 12-minute and 59-second response time because you don't have the seconds to analyze anything there.
That is self-reported.
And do you know how, the source of that data for Dixie Ambulance?
From what I've been told and what I've heard in the testimonies and depositions and stuff, the employees themselves enter this data into the system.
So that's self-reported data.
Correct.
That's all I have.
If you look at the fourth item down,
Yes.
I believe the date is 11/2/2011,
Okay.
and then 19/21.
Correct.
And that would be, according to your testimony, when the unit was notified.
Correct.
The next column says 19/22,
Correct.
and that would be when they go en route.
Yes.
Okay. So the time is different.
Yes.
Okay. Now, what if a couple of EMTs, paramedics are sitting in an ambulance at a staging location? They have 8.5, 10 calls a day, transports a day. They're sitting at their staging location and a call comes over the radio.
Okay.
There might be a couple second delay, but where you're rounding to minutes, is it probable that that would be the same minute?
It could be in the same minute, but that's why I said the data, it's hard, you couldn't use this to form any opinions on response times because you don't have the seconds. And if you're doing an 8-minute and 59-second or 12-minute and 59-second response time, you need the seconds to complete that accurately.
Have you contemplated the potential statistical tests that you could run to account for potential bias that may come into the data because it's rounded?
I haven't used this data for my analysis.
Are you aware of any statistical tests that could be used?
No.
Nothing further.
No further? Just had one follow-up question. Reference has been made several times to the 8 minutes and 59 seconds.
Yeah.
What would be the significance of just saying 9 minutes as distinguished from 8 minutes and 59 seconds?
You know, I don't know. It's just the National Fire Protection Agency's recommendation in the 1710 for an 8-minute and 59-second response times on the emergent calls. And so that's kind of where we've always follow it as their guidelines.
Okay, thank you.
Our next witness was going to be Gary Esplin, but we understood he was going to be here at 9 o'clock unless he's here.